Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, updating some trade deadline rumors within 2 weeks of the NBA trade deadline. What Wolves players are being talked about as potential targets for other teams, and who might the Wolves get in return? Also, a comparison of Ja Morant and Anthony Edwards thus far through Ant's third season compared with Ja's third season, which was last year. We'll also preview Wolves-Grizzlies on Friday night. It's all upcoming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked on Wolves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves game day. The Wolves take on the Grizzlies tonight back at Target Center. We'll talk about that towards the end of the show today. I want to talk trade deadline first. But the very first thing I want to do is say thank you for making Locked on Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, Locked on Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked on Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's free. Download the Locked on Sports Minnesota app today on Roku or Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked on T-Wolves. That's at Locked on T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right. I want to start today's show by talking trade deadline. We're, of course, now within 2 weeks of the deadline, 2 weeks from yesterday, Thursday, February 9th. And rumors are kind of flying fast and furious, as they often are this time of year. We talked a little bit about Wolves rumors earlier this week, but there's been a couple new rumblings out there. Actually, most of what I want to talk about today comes from an Eric Pincus article over at Bleacher Report. I believe he used to be at Hoopsap a few years ago. But anyways, Pincus has the article is called 2023 NBA Trade Watch Best Available Guards and Their Top Landing Spots. And there's like 3 or 4 different Wolves mentions in here. So I want to kind of run down the list and also just kind of discuss generally what I think of those rumors and kind of reiterate what my prediction's been here for a little while, because it's going to stay the same. But first, the rumors. The first one he mentions is that the Timberwolves, this is actually a relatively new one, although not surprising. I don't think we've heard this one recently, that the Timberwolves have interest in Raptors guard Fred VanVleet, and they're one of 6 teams that Pincus mentions that would have interest in VanVleet, and I'll list them all here in just a second if I can find where they went. Here we go. Potential playoff contenders that would have interest in VanVleet are Miami, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Timberwolves, the Mavericks, the Suns, and the Wizards. So 6 of those. Oh, actually, also the Orlando Magic, apparently. But 5 of those 7 teams are in the Western Conference that would have interest in VanVleet. Now, VanVleet is in the final year of his deal. He's got a player option next season for a little under $23 million that I'm sure would decline. He's about to turn 29 years old, so he's looking for that kind of likely last higher value extension, right? Because he could play for $23 million. He may not get much more than that on the open market in terms of average annual value, but he'll get more security if he gets a longer deal. He's about to hit the downhill side of his career. So it would make sense that VanVleet would be searching for something a little bit better and would likely opt out. So, like, what would the Wolves give up for Fred VanVleet? Remember, there's no picks to trade. The Timberwolves literally cannot trade a first-round pick this season or this throughout this year. They've got some second rounders. They've got a couple extra second rounders in there. But like, how are you going to match that salary without trading DAngelo Russell? And they're, who knows? Maybe it's a 3-team deal. Deal goes somewhere else. Like, that's really the only way that makes sense. But there's no picks to add. And that's why so many of these potentially larger scale deals involving the Wolves have to include a third team, because somebody has to supply the value. The Timberwolves aren't trading Karl-Anthony Towns. They're not trading Anthony Edwards. They're not trading Rudy Gobert. And that leaves, they're probably not trading Jaden McDaniels unless it's part of some insane blockbuster where they're getting back an all-star. It's pretty, they didn't trade him in the Gobert deal. They chose to trade Kessler in a first rounder, basically, instead of McDaniels is what's been reported. So, like, what are you trading? D'Lo's got the expiring deal. Jalen Noel and Naz Reid both have, well, certainly Naz Reid has positive trade value, but he also makes less than $3 million and is an expiring. So the Wolves shouldn't be super motivated to move him. You're not going to trade Kyle Anderson, although it's been reported teams are interested. Jalen Noel's an expiring. You could maybe get a second rounder for him if somebody wants to, try him out as a bench scorer. But he hasn't helped himself in the last few weeks. You're not trading Jordan McLaughlin. He's injured anyway. You're not trading Taurean Prince. He's also injured now. There's really nobody else on the roster that's viable to trade unless you're talking about a minor deal involving Nate Knight. I mean, that's kind of it, right? So the only players that are really possible to trade would be DAngelo Russell and Naz Reid. I mean, that's basically it on the roster that you would really legitimately consider trading or would be available or would even be possible to trade. So I don't understand how VanVleet would end up in Minnesota. D'Lo would have to be part of any deal, potentially also Naz Reid. And with him having the ability to walk at the end of the year, I just don't think that makes a whole lot of sense unless you're planning to then, sign him for an extension. But it's dicey, right? He's about to turn 30 or about to turn 29. And then next year he turns 30. And like, what's the next move with VanVleet if you were to acquire him? So I'd be really surprised if the Timberwolves legitimately got in on that. The Mike Conley thing is mentioned again, according to Eric Pincus at Bleacher Report, along with the Lakers and Clippers, as teams have an interest in Conley. I covered that extensively, I think a week and a half ago or so here on the show, when the initial rumor came out that the Wolves would be interested in D'Lo would be part of any deal. Like potentially the Jazz could recoup even more assets in a deal for if they take on D'Lo and the Wolves take on Conley. Now, the Jazz would be freeing up cap space for next year because remember, Conley has a partial guarantee next year. That's like a pretty good chunk of his, I think it's like 16, 18 million, something like that, partial guarantee for next season. So that would be, the Jazz would be motivated to move off of that. But I also think that they could do better than an expiring D'Lo contract, most likely. So if the Jazz were to trade Conley, and remember, they don't have to. They could trade him this offseason too with that partial guarantee for next year. So I would be surprised if the Wolves ended up with Conley. Also, another interdivision trade, and the other thing is the Jazz shouldn't be incentivized to make the Wolves better because they have a million Timberwolves picks upcoming. So why would they want to make the Wolves draft position worse when they hold the picks, right? The last thing was DAngelo Russell interest from other teams. We've heard about Miami. I believe Dallas had been mentioned as a team rumored previously as well, but also Phoenix and the Clippers in the mix. So 3 of those 4 teams, Western Conference teams, who potentially could have interest in DAngelo Russell if he becomes available. Now, according to Pincus, he's got a quote in here from a Western Conference executive, an anonymous executive, who says, quote, "I don't think the Wolves reinvest in Russell," meaning sign him to an extension. Quote, "The combination of players they have just isn't clicking." Well, that's fair. That's true. The Wolves could be playing really well, and it's pretty unlikely the Wolves are going to extend DAngelo Russell because D'Lo wants to get paid more than he's worth, surely, because most players do, but also a guy who's coming off a max extension who should be entering the prime of his career, he's going to look for something close to another max extension. The Wolves that's not feasible for Minnesota to do. So anyway, Pincus mentions the Heat, Suns, Mavs, and Clippers as potential contenders that could try and land DAngelo Russell. Again, the same thing. Kyle Lowry's an attractive return. I don't know what the Suns would offer, or Dallas for that matter. I mean, like they don't have a true second star. I mean, you could D'Lo probably still wouldn't technically be that, but they could sell him as that. But he would immediately become like really their second option. I mean, I understand why the Mavs would be interested in having somebody that could play off of Luka and he wouldn't dominate the ball. D'Lo would not dominate the ball in a place like Dallas. The Clippers, they have a little bit more to offer. Like you could see a deal with Terrence Mann involved. We talked about him the other day on the show. I just don't know how that gets done and why the Clippers would be incentivized to move on from Terrence Mann, who they have under contract for the next couple of years, for a much worse defender and I don't know, less consistent player. Terrence Mann is kind of the epitome of consistency and a really good defender. D'Lo is neither of those things. Again, D'Lo is a good player, but he's not those things. So I'd be surprised if D'Lo moves. And it all comes back to what I said. I think I even said this on Thursday's show. I don't think the Wolves make a trade. If they do make a trade, I think it's a semi-minor trade, a Nate Knight for a second rounder, maybe Naz for a couple of second rounders, something like that. Although I don't think Naz gets traded at this point just because of how well he's played and the Wolves needing that center depth. But Towns and Gobert, knock on wood, should both be healthy in the second half of the season. And if that's the case, you don't need 4 rotation caliber centers, and the Wolves have that. If depending on what you think of, I think Nate Knight and Naz Reid are both rotation caliber NBA players, and that doesn't even count Luka Garza on the 2-way deal. So, I think the Wolves hang on to Garza, but potentially Knight or Reid could be traded. That's really the only thing I see as a possibility here for the Wolves at the deadline, unless there's something with Jalen Noel potentially. But again, I think he's kind of played himself out of trade conversations. All right. I want to look at the Ja Morant, Anthony Edwards conversation. I brought this up again the other day, and I've talked about it a lot on the show over the past several months because there's a lot of parallels to how Ja and Ant, in some ways, how they play, but how the first 2.5 or so years of their career have gone. So I want to talk about Ja's season last year compared to Ant's season this year, each their year 3 seasons. So we'll get into that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at LinkedIn. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools. They go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post, company, and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates. Identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect with them fast and for free. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications all on one platform. It's 2023 now. It's almost February 2023. And kicking off the year right is all about getting the right team member, and LinkedIn Jobs can help you do that. It's why small businesses ranked LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's talk Ant and Ja. This is a fascinating comparison in my mind, and there's a lot of things about it that are really intriguing to me. One, Ja was, in my opinion, a little bit overrated his first couple years in the league. Ton of fun, super athletic, lots of great dunks. I get it, but he wasn't efficient enough offensively, and he was a bad defender. Anthony Edwards, it's a really crude summary of Ja's first 2 years, right? But if you wanted to summarize Ant's first 2 years, pretty similar. Super exciting, ultra athletic, ton of fun to watch. Crazy dunks, poster dunks, aggressive, not efficient enough offensively, and spotty on defense. Pretty similar. Now, and again, that's just comparing. Ja's, of course, been in the league 1 year longer. So Ja's, what is it, 2021, 21, 22 years versus Ant's. I said I'm a year off. 1920, whatever. Ja's first 2 years versus Ant's first 2 years, right? And Ant's a year younger than Ja was, basically. Now, compare so far this season, Ant has played in 50 games. Last season, in Ja Morant's third season, he played in 57 total games in the regular season. Remember, he had the injury, and Memphis was really good with him out. So now's a pretty good time with the game tonight, Wolves-Grizzlies for the third time this season, to compare Ant's 50-game campaign so far in year 3 and Ja's 57-game campaign last year in his year 3. Ja's last season was better. And I talked in this offseason about how I wanted to see Anthony Edwards make a third-year leap like Ja Morant, because that would make him an all-star, which Ja was last year. It would make him competitive for an all-NBA team selection as well. And I thought Ant had a really good shot of doing it. Why? Because he's a better defender than Ja Morant, a better on-ball defender, certainly. And he's a better three-point shooter than Ja Morant. However, so far this season, and this is the season as a whole, it's not the recency bias of the last 3 crazy scoring games he's had, or some of the things Ant's done more recently. But overall for the season, Ant is averaging about 3 points less than Ja did last year. He's actually only averaging 0.3 rebounds more per game, and about a little over 2 assists less per game than Ja did last season. Percentage-wise, last season, Ja Morant shot 49.3% from the field. Ant is under 46%. He's a couple percentage points better from the three-point line, from beyond the three-point line, and he's a slightly better free throw shooter. However, where Ja gets his edge is that he gets the line so much more often. Ja was attempting almost 2 more free throws per game last season, and if you're shooting over 75%, I mean, that's 1.5 points more per game on average just at the free throw line. Ja was also a better shooter at the rim, which is where, in my opinion, where the biggest difference comes in, is even though Ant has a size advantage on Ja Morant, Morant is such a better shooter, or better finisher at the rim, I should say. And because of that, because he takes more shots at the rim, he gets fouled more often, and he shoots less threes, Morant's overall field goal percentage, like I said, was almost 50% last season. His free throw rate was 0.35, meaning for every field goal attempt he shot, he was shooting more than a third of a free throw. Ants is about 0.29 so far this season. Almost 40% of Ants field goal attempts are from three, only 22%. So a little more than 1 in 5 of Ja's field goal attempts last year is coming from 3-point range. Now, Ant's a better 3-point shooter, but Ja's only a little below league average. So at lower volume, slightly below league average, but higher volume in the paint and more free throws, that's a more efficient offensive player than a player who shoots a higher volume of threes like Ant and is slightly above league average or slightly above, but shoots less free throws and makes less shots at the rim. Ja's a more efficient offensive player. And then on top of that, the assist rate. I mean, Ja Morant plays point guard. Ant has been playing point guard really for much of the season, but Ja Morant exclusively plays point guard and had a 34% assist rate last season. Ant this year is at 19%. And I mean, it's an improvement, right? Last season, he was 17.4% as a rookie. He was 14.6%. He's playing on the ball far more often this year, Ant is, than he did either of his first 2 seasons in the league. In fact, he's actually played the 2 guard more than he ever did the first 2 seasons, right? Because the Wolves have played so much bigger for most of the season. But all that to say, it's the assist rate advantage for Ja. It's more attempts at the rim and it's more free throw attempts, and only a couple of percentage points off on the 3-point percentage at a lower volume. And that's kind of where that balances out a bit, and where Ja actually gets his edge is because that's really Ant's only obvious advantage is the long range shooting. Now, Ant is a better defender, and you can find metrics that argue either direction, but Anthony Edwards is a better defender than Ja Morant. He's bigger. He's every bit as athletic, if not more so. And that's not a debate. I'm not willing to engage in a debate about who's more athletic, Ja Morant or Anthony Edwards. But I'm just saying they're the same realm athletically, right? Ant's bigger. I think he's got better on-ball tools, the bigger wingspan, all that stuff. I also think he's got better anticipation skills defensively off the ball, even if sometimes he falls asleep defensively. But Ant's edge is on defense. He's been a better defender. He's been a good defender this year. Ja was not a good defender last season, and he really hasn't been this year either. So, in a vacuum, Ja Morant had a better third season than Ant has had through 50 games of this season. Now, if Ant plays like he has for the past week and a half or so, the rest of the season, which basically is like how he played March, April playoffs last year, then I mean, yeah, it'll be the similar conversation. Then we'll be talking about Ant year 3 being very similar to Ja Morant year 3. Now this season, Ja has only continued to get better. And I mean, like, the assist rate's better. He's shooting more threes this year at a worse percentage, which, I mean, I guess kind of flies in the face of the point I just made of what he was better at last year. But he's still getting to the rim plenty. He's still making shots at the rim. He's still doing Ja Morant things. Now, last year he was over 70% at the rim, which is nuts. This year he's about 66%, which is still really, really good. But it's the more threes at the lower clip that have hurt him a little. Still, overall, Ja Morant is incredible, and he's still a better player than Anthony Edwards is. I would maintain that Anthony Edwards has a higher ceiling. I don't want to say significantly higher because Ja Morant is really, really good. But Anthony Edwards has a higher ceiling because of the size advantage, because of the shooting advantage, the defensive, how much better he is defensively. And I really don't think it's close there when Ant locks in defensively. At this moment, right now, today, January 27th, 2023, Ja Morant's the better player. He was the better player in his year 3 last year than what Ant is so far in year 3 this year. But 5 years from now, Anthony Edwards has a great chance of being a better player than Ja Morant and ultimately having a better career because of the size, the shooting capability, the defense, and frankly, the build and the way that each of them play. Because Ant shoots more threes and still can get to the paint and generally takes a little bit less punishment because he shoots more threes, Ja's a little bit smaller and a little bit more injury prone for those reasons. And obviously, I hope neither of these guys gets hurt because they're both incredible to watch. But I think Ant has a little advantage there because of the build and the fact he's more willing and more able to shoot threes at a higher clip. We're seeing that percentage rise a little lately for Ant too. And if he starts sniffing 40% from 3 and that, the step back is so filthy, then like that gap could widen even more so. But a fascinating comparison to watch because of the similarities, the I guess budding rivalry between Memphis and Minnesota, and we know everything that happened in the playoff series and the stuff Ant said about Memphis and their fans, and of course Memphis the last game. We'll talk about this in a minute when they had all the ejections at the end of the Timberwolves win back at the end of November. It's a fascinating matchup, and Ant loves to guard Ja, and of course there's the Towns and Morant father thing, and like there's so much going on in this matchup, and I think Ant and Ja specifically is going to be a ton of fun to watch over the next several years. All right, let's close the show by previewing Wolves-Grizzlies. It's been 2 months since we've seen Memphis, so talking about what happened the last couple times these teams faced off, what to expect, what the Wolves need to do to pull out a win on a Friday night at Target Center. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our new friends over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are here. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the #1 sportsbook in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers can join today and get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. NFL championship games this weekend. That's going to be a ton of fun. Of course, lots of basketball as well. It's all in an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. Football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's talk Wolves-Grizzlies. So Memphis has lost 4 straight. They had just won like 13 in a row. They lost 4 straight. Close loss to Golden State on Wednesday. So Memphis is probably looking at this as like, hey, it's a chance for revenge. They lost to Minnesota last time out. It's a chance to get right to after losing 4 straight to get back in the win column for the Grizzlies. Injury-wise, Memphis is missing Steven Adams. He's out for the next 3+ weeks. He has a sprain in his knee. Danny Green is going to make his debut next week, but has not played yet. And John Conchar is out in concussion protocol. At least he missed Wednesday's game. So they do have a few injuries. I would say not quite as impactful as the Wolves, given that Towns is still out. But, I mean, those are all important rotation type guys, and Adams and Conchar, especially so far this season for them. So it hurts, obviously, that they're out. The Wolves have played the Grizzlies twice early on this season. The Wolves took them on in the 13th game of the year. Grizzlies won by 11 in that one. That one was in Memphis. And then the Timberwolves beat the Grizzlies on November 30th, which was the Wolves' first game after Karl-Anthony Towns got hurt at Washington. And Minnesota came into this game, a game under 500, pulled even at 11-11 with this win over Memphis. In the loss, Dylan Brooks really hurt the Wolves, 21 points. Ja Morant had 28, 10 and 8. 28 on 25 shots. He was only 2 of 10 outside the arc, but he killed the Wolves, 9 of 15 inside the arc. Desmond Bane had 24 points, which is extremely notable because I should also mention Ant had 28, 6 and 6 in that first game. Towns was relatively quiet. Gobert was relatively quiet. And then in the second game, Desmond Bane did not play in game 2 and the Wolves won. And that's obviously significant. He's their second best player. Ja had 24, 6 and 5. So another good game for him against the Wolves. This time he only shot 4 threes and got to the line 11 times, although he didn't shoot free throws very well. But it was really only Ja Morant that came to the party for Memphis. For the Wolves, again, Gobert with a very quiet game, only had 1 rebound in 26 minutes, and it was all about Ant, 29 points and 18 shots. So a couple of strong scoring performances so far against the Grizzlies this year for Ant, 28 in the first game, the loss, and 29 in the win. D'Lo had 15 and 10 in that one as well. And then Jalen Noel had 24 points off the bench in that win at the end of November. And remember, I should also mention Jaden McDaniels missed that game. He was out due to illness. So no Bane for Memphis and no McDaniels for Minnesota in that one. Also no Towns for Minnesota. And then in this one, we'll have no Towns. We'll have no Steven Adams. Gobert is questionable for the Timberwolves. So the matchup is still intriguing. No Steven Adams is really significant. He's a big part of what they do in terms of offensive rebounding the ball. Memphis is the number 2 team in the league in offensive rebound percentage, which, of course, the Wolves remain 28th in defensive rebound percentage. So taking on a team that offensively rebounds the ball as well as Memphis is always scary for the Wolves. And that, to me, that's the biggest thing in this game. Like, obviously, yeah, guarding Bane, guarding Morant, that's super important. But second chance points are probably going to make or break this game. And I feel like every time I say that, the Timberwolves have a terrible performance on the glass. But it's very important in this game. Again, Memphis is the second best team in the league for offensive rebound percentage. The Wolves are the third worst in terms of defensive rebound percentage league-wide. Now, no Steven Adams matters, right? That really impacts what they do. He grabs more than 5 offensive rebounds per game, by far the most of anyone on their team. Of course, they've still got Jaren Jackson Jr., they've still got Brandon Clark, both guys who have kind of taken turns giving the Wolves trouble on the glass. And, they've got guards that rebound the ball too. I mean, Ja Morant's not a bad rebounding guard. Like, he's pretty good for a point guard. They've got a handful of guys that can do that. But no Steven Adams changes that a little. It's still a key. It's always a key. Whenever there's a team the Wolves are playing that's like average or better on the offensive glass, you got to be worried about it because of how bad Minnesota is on the defensive glass. The second thing would be avoiding turnovers. I mean, Memphis is a really good defensive team. They're actually first in the entire NBA in defensive rating. And they're number 12 in terms of turnover rate. So they turn teams over 13% of the time. The Wolves have really struggled with turnovers this year. Coming into this game, the Timberwolves are actually 28th in turnover percentage. So Memphis turns you over 13% of the time. The Wolves turn it over offensively 13.9%. So basically 14% of the time. And they've been really sloppy here of late as well. I feel in general, like over the course of January, it's improved a little, but the last few games, that Houston lost, like, sloppy with the ball. Although I should say, when they closed out the game and won on Wednesday, the Wolves did against the Pelicans, the offense was crisp. And I spent a while talking about that on Thursday's show. I thought the passing was crisp. The decision-making was good. The shot taking, the shot selection was sound for the Wolves on Wednesday. So hopefully that's a sign of some improvement. Now, we've said that in the past this season, and that hasn't been the case. But a team like Memphis is going to be opportunistic, right? Memphis is an incredibly good defensive team. They turn you over. They contest shots extremely well. They do a pretty good job of defending without fouling, and they're a solid rebounding team on the defensive glass as well. So taking care of the basketball offensively, getting on the glass in terms of limiting second chance opportunities for the Grizzlies is also huge. And the third thing, I already mentioned Desmond Bane. He's the guy you got to look out for. He's somebody they didn't have to contend with in game 2 this season. The second game the Wolves took on the Grizzlies. In the first game, what did he do in the first game? He had 24 on 7 of 16 shooting. He was only 2 of 7 outside the arc, which is uncharacteristic for Bane, right? I mean, Desmond Bane's a 42.3% three-point shooter, and he's averaging just under 22 points per game. He's healthy now. He's on the floor, and that's a concern for Minnesota. So I think it's probably Anton Morant and it's McDaniels on Desmond Bane. And then you still have Dylan Brooks to deal with. Of course, the Wolves have a couple other guys who like to defend as well. Austin Rivers, Kyle Anderson. So maybe they try some different things there with messing around with who's on who. But again, very significant. There's no Steven Adams. I think it's also significant there's no John Conchar. I mean, he's a solid kind of all around do it all type guy for them rotationally. Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating matchup, and the Ja versus Ant thing is so much fun. But offensive rebounds for Memphis, limit the turnovers because they'll turn you over defensively, and do your best to contain Desmond Bane, contest jump shots from him on the perimeter, whatever it takes to kind of keep him from getting free and getting looks. We'll, of course, go live for the postcast. We do that on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. If you're not familiar, go subscribe so you'll be notified. Marnie Gellner from Bally Sports North and I go live after she's done with the TV postgame. So typically about 40, 45 minutes following the final horn. So it's a 6:30 tip Friday night on NBA TV, as well as locally on Bally Sports North. So that likely will be, it'll be about 30 minutes earlier than normal. So we're looking at like 9:45-ish or something like that, depending on how long the game is. You'll find us live on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel, and then we'll post the audio to whatever audio platform you like to listen to. You can find it on the Locked On Wolves feed after the fact as well. That's all we have for you today. A big thank you for those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CK, Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now, make your second listen the Game to Game NBA podcast. Every moment, every top performance, and every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.